seeing a few. Wow. Do we have a quorum?
There's one in here.
There is one in there.
All right, we'll call this meeting to order. First of all, we'll stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Jean, do the roll call, please.
Joe Baratka. Al Barkstrom.
Here.
Michelle Drobnik. Brian Ernst.
Here.
Doug Erickson.
Here.
Jeff Hallstrand. Jason Hastings.
Here.
Paula Hodak.
Here.
Bob Kopish.
Here.
Larry Polachek. Not here. Jordan Spacek excused. Patty Steven not here. And Dennis Wartko not here.
Okay, moving on. Communications.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
Alan Barkstrom, District 8. Because this meeting is focused on bug tussle, I thought I would share some information that could be relevant to the decisions in your deliberations. And I'm going to talk about what's going on in Marathon County. They are well into an arrangement with bug tussle. And this occurred in 2021. So their deal was for 18 towers, 190 miles of buried cable. And Marathon County is substantially larger than us. Their population is 139,000. So now I find out that there was a request for an additional $8 million. And so I did call Lance Leonard. He is Marathon County Administrator, and he was very gracious to chat with me, and this happened yesterday. So anyway, from they're going through a resolution right now in their county board to add an additional $8 million. So that could happen to us. What he said was that the project has expanded. The 190 miles of buried cable went to 400, and there was more fiber to the home. And there was also some overruns that amounted to 5 million. So I was curious about that. So with that in mind, during the question period, I thought that would be an appropriate question was, what were the circumstances that caused such a large departure from the original budget plan? I mean, it was a substantial amount. And more fiber to the home, who pays for fiber to the home? And what were the explanations for the cost overruns? Because it sounds to me like we could have an arrangement and then somebody comes back and asks for more. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barkstrom. Anybody else? Mr. Hastings.
Just to capitalize what Alan said, Mitch did say that he'd come back for 10 million in the north in the last meeting. So there's a total of 25 million as of right now.
Thank you, Jason. Anybody else? Comments? I just have one myself. The purpose of this meeting is to find out more in depth about the understanding and, get more understanding of this project before we vote on the resolution next Tuesday. Otherwise, we'll just see it after the executive meeting, which is Thursday. So this is just to get a more thorough understanding of what this involves. Okay, is there any public comment? Is anybody signed up for public comment? Go ahead. State your name and where you're from.
Good morning. Okay. Good morning. I'm Dave Schmidt. I live at N16365 Lakeshore Drive up on Butternut Lake in the boondocks where we don't have any cell connection. I have been on Zoom and in person at some of these meetings getting updates about bug tussle. What brought me here today is what is the number one thing that the board wants out of this program? When this started at one of the first meetings, I remember one of the main goals, which I think should stick to it, and that is we need protection for our law enforcement, big time in this county. Cell tower, all of that stuff, that's secondhand in my book. I can get that on my own. I just had it borrowed into my house. Fiber optic, some of the best that we got in Price County right now goes by my house, and we've got all the speed we need. So I don't know why we want to fund this on the taxpayers' back. There's people out there that are going to take care of us. Let's get to the number one problem. And that is our emergency communications. We need to take care of our sheriff's department, our local police, fire, ambulance, and also our DNR. These people are all working in emergency service together. We need to get them on the same board, the same radios, so they can communicate like what's happening over to the west of us. Why are we looking at the cellular service on the taxpayers' back is what I brought up earlier. How many of you know about the new emergency tower that was put up in Park Falls? Any of you know about it? I don't know all the details about it, but it's 150 foot tall. It covers 1,500 square miles. Price County is about 1,200 square miles. That covers all of it. You can go down to the southern part with the ambulance. It's as clear as a bell. Now, like I said, I don't know if the sheriff is on it or anybody else, but here we're looking at 10 towers in Price County. I'm beginning to wonder, do we need them? I don't think we do, because I've talked to experts that do this for a living. They don't believe we need them if you put the right communication on them. Now, maybe Buck Tussle knows more. And then my other questions are, if they start coming in, we go along with this program, they buy the towers, they buy the generators, they're ready to go, and they defunk, we get 2 towers up. Is there coverage to where we're out of the picture with the finances? That's another big thing I think you should ask this company. And then we have a lot of maintenance on it. I don't know who takes care of that, but we have air conditioning in these places. We have generators. You have to plow snow in the winter, grass cutting, keep the brush down. We got all of that maintenance. Now, do they take care of all of that for us? If they belly up, then who takes care of it? Seems like this system with 10 towers, I don't believe we need to have that many. So I'm asking that at this time that I'm going to go on record to not support this program that you're looking at. I think we need to get some other companies in here to look at other options. And if we only stick with this one company and we have not gone out to talk to other companies, is Price County held liable for a lawsuit? Yeah, for sure, if I was another company out there that could give you this service and you haven't looked at me, I think I'd throw a lawsuit at all of you. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on. Next item is Government Participation Project Broadband and Cellular Services. We have Mitch and Scott here from Buck Tussle, Andy and Ben.
Yep.
From,
Ben's online, so. Yeah.
Okay. From Atoli's Law.
Did you want to do public comment online?
Sure.
So if there's anybody online that would like to make a public comment, it's *6 to unmute yourself. Again, *6. We currently have 14 participants online, just so everybody's aware. Nobody online.
Okay, we'll move on then. Mitch, Scott, you guys want to start this?
Yeah, and I'll give a little bit background. So we have Scott, who represents Bug Tussle. We have Mitch, who we've met before Bug Tussle. We have Andy and Ben, like the chair said. We've brought them here today to ask the questions. This is your opportunity to understand what the project is, the specifics, how, there was a lot of public comments. Those can be asked and addressed. We also, this resolution in front of you, and we're not doing any voting, no anything on a resolution today. We will have this same resolution Potentially, if there's some changes, we can work through Ben and Andy with that for Thursday consideration, which is the executive committee. From the executive committee, it would go to the board meeting next Tuesday, and that's when the final vote would happen. We need 3/4 of the whole because it's a borrowing, so that would be different than many other resolutions that we do. We also did invite law enforcement here today because, like Mr. Schmidt brought up, we do have a emergency management tower concern in the future. We've been working on some projects. We did put those projects on hold because of the potential partnership with Bug Tussle and being able to co-locate on their towers. So I guess we'll turn over to Scott. I did kind of give him some talking points. I know he brought a bunch of their own talking points. At any time, if you have questions, this is the time to ask.
Thank you, Nick. Good morning, everyone. My name is Scott Felt with Bug Tussle. Just a little bit about myself. Actually, I've been with Bug Tussle now for a year, but prior to being with Bug Tussle, I was the county administrator for Kewaunee County. That's just south of Dorr, just east of Brown. Part of what interested me in coming to Bug Tussle was the projects that we did in Kewaunee County. Back when I first started with Kewaunee County, one of the first things I was hearing from businesses and residents is that they wanted better internet access. And that was being said for a number of years. Finally, we put together a project with Bug Tussle that was also partially funded by a PSC grant. That was to do 7 towers. Bug Tussle built 9. Then we did a second project with them to put in over 60 miles of middle mile fiber optic to not only attach the towers, but also to provide that backbone for last mile service as well. So Bug Tussle has been around for over 20 years. It's just recently, about 2020, 2019, that we really decided that we wanted to start to get into the fiber. A few years before that, we were doing towers. And so that's part of the reason why we're before you today is our founder, Steve Schneider, grew up on a farm in Calumet County. And one of the things that he saw and which really irked him was that when it came to the rural areas, there wasn't anyone putting up towers or putting in fiber to help provide that type of service to the rural areas. And so Steve had made sure that it was a priority that we focus on rural areas. We don't go into the urban areas. We're not in Milwaukee. We're not in Madison. We're not in La Crosse. We're not in Eau Claire. We're in the rural areas. And the reason why is because too often the rural areas are forgotten. And that's part of the reason why we're here. So I'll try to give some answers to some of the frequently asked questions. As you know, the project has roughly 8 towers, 10 sites with 85 miles of fiber to be put into Price County. Part of the big reason for doing this is, in my estimation, and I believe many would agree, this is an infrastructure project. This is to help to provide better communications, whether that's 911 communications, whether that's cellular communications, whether that's wireless internet communications. Putting up towers will allow that coverage. When Kewaunee County was here, we had none of those up. After we put up our 7, almost 90% of the county was covered with service because of that. So it's an infrastructure project, and we also believe that it helps to set the stage or the foundation for future projects where we can then eventually get fiber to the home. As we know, more and more folks are working from home, more and more children are studying from home, and you're seeing more and more streaming of television and everything else being done from home. So therefore, fiber optics is almost becoming a necessity. I know in Kewaunee County and in a lot of the counties that I travel to, that home decisions are made as to whether there is coverage or not. So when we talk about this project, I know that there are some basic questions that are there, and then I'm more than happy. And as I'm talking, if you have a question, please feel free. I'd rather do it that way than have you wait. One of the big questions that we're hearing is why 30 years? Typically, counties only bond for 20 years. And I understand that. That was an issue that we have in other counties. Part of the reason that it is 30 years is I like to make it an example of buying a home. Most people have a 30-year mortgage. You can have a 20, you can have a 10, you can have a 15. But why most people do 30-year mortgages has to do with being able to cash flow and make the payments. Broadband and towers is a capital-intensive project of which it does not generate revenue right away. You have to build the tower, you have to put in the fiber before you can get the subscribers and the customers to generate the revenue. Therefore, from that standpoint, we need to have 30 years to allow for the payments so that way we can make this happen. Plus, the other thing that I would love to remind the board is this. This bond issue is a loan. We pay it all back plus interest. We know that in Kewaunee County, part of what made it attractive is that when it was all said and done, we would get millions of dollars back plus interest, plus have internet access for our residents, which is important. In that same respect, we would have better communications for our sheriff's department. We would have our own dark fiber strands for our county that we could use for our own use, as well as we know that we can co-locate some of our equipment upon bug tussle towers as well. So when we talk about these projects, they are capital intensive, and that's why we need 30 years. What happens if the additional bonding is not approved? Well, seriously, then what happens is if we move forward with the project, it would be greatly delayed because it's the funds that help us to be able to do the project. I know that some are asking about the equipment on the towers or the fiber itself, whether it has value. It absolutely does have value and will have value in the future. We know that when we build our towers and when we put the fiber in, that those towers and that fiber lasts for decades. Now, there are new equipment that will put on towers and new circuits that will put on the ends of the fiber optic cable. But that is a maintenance issue. That is something that Bug Tussle then replaces to make sure that we are continuing to provide good service. And so from that standpoint, that is a maintenance cost that Bug Tussle incurs. So will the changes in technology impact the repayment of funds? We do not see that it will, in that as long as we're continuing to provide service and we have subscribers to generate the revenue, we believe that we will be able to make the repayments. I know a number of you are asking the questions regarding guarantees because 12 million is a lot of money. 12, correct? 15?
Yeah, so it's up
I'm
to
sorry,
15.
I was just in Marathon the other day, so.
So the request for us is up to 15.
Up to 15. So the question comes down to is what guarantees are in place? As you've probably been told before, how the payments will be done, and there's a number of different, and I want to provide some additional information. So if Price County were to pass a $15 million bond issue, that does not mean that a week from now we get to walk up to Nick and say, can we have our check for $15 million? That's not how this project works. What happens is think of the $15 million as reimbursement. We do not get $1 until we provide proof and invoices to Price County that the work has been done. If the work hasn't been done, you do not release the funds. It's really that simple. And in that same respect, again, I want to repeat, the money is a loan. So what happens is we do the work, you provide the reimbursement, and then over time, we repay that loan with interest. So in that respect, there's one guarantee right at the start that you would only be losing if everything were to blow up. You would only be losing what was reimbursed to begin with. If the worst case scenario happens, Bug Tussle is legally obligated to make the payments. If for some reason Bug Tussle were to fold, then the guarantor is the parent company, which is Hilbert Communications. Hilbert Communications, again, would have to make those payments if Bug Tussle could not. If for some reason, which again, we do not foresee either happening, if both of those were to happen, then Price County would be the owner of all physical assets from that project, which meaning towers and fiber, of which, yes, sir.
What about the other counties?
I'm sorry,
Price County will be owner of the towers. What about the other counties?
the other counties would be owners of the physical assets in their counties. So the project that would happen is if something were to happen, then the county would be the owner of the physical assets of their project. Yes, sir.
So the assets in the county itself and the funds for the county itself are specific to that county.
Absolutely. There cannot be a mixing.
Second question is.
Do you want to use your mic, Joe? Just
Thanks, Nick.
online can't hear you.
Sorry. So my first question was that the assets and the funds are county specific, not as a whole with all the counties involved together.
Correct. There is no mixing of funds.
Okay, second question is, while we would gain those assets if it was to fold, is there a mortgage agreement to where we will be listed as a mortgage holder for those assets, or how do you determine that legal standing?
I will defer to an attorney regarding this, but it is my understanding that what happens is that the county is in first position for all assets that are within the county, as well as in first position for repayment.
So, Scott, do you want to clarify too? So say we were a third of the way through the project, you had 3 towers out, we released $3 million of the up to 15, and then the explosion happened. We're
Armageddon,
not
yes.
The county is not on the hook for 15 million. They're on the hook for 3 million. At that, I mean, the other money's still sitting there, so it's available to pay it back. But the 3 million has been spent. That's what the outstanding debt.
Correct.
Pro rata, right?
Pro rata? Yeah, essentially, yes. I mean, the other 12 million would still be there. The 3 million had been withdrawn and paid or reimbursed to Bug Tussle. Any payments that had been made by Bug Tussle during that time. So at the most, the exposure would be in your scenario, Nick, would be $3 million. Plus then any assets that had been built or that are there would be Price County's as well.
And with that, there's been several questions about, can Bug Tussle default in one county only, or is it as a whole?
Again, legal question that I am unsure of. I would believe that it would be tough for Bug Tussle as a whole, if they are still operating, to not be responsible for making payments, regardless of whether there was issues in one county or the other. If Bug Tussle as an entity is still functioning, I would believe, and again, I would defer to Andy, that if that were the case, that Bug Tussle would still be responsible for making payments. Yes, Mr. Chair.
I have a quick, question or comment. Now, you're referring to this as a loan, but it's a bond, and the money itself is not coming from the county coffers. It's coming from investors that buy these bonds, correct?
Again, from how that works is the county would issue social bonds as part of a consortium of other counties in Fond du Lac County. There are investors that would buy those bonds, yes. Those investors would expect there to be a payment, of which in the documents there is an obligation from the county that if Bug Tussle and its guarantor, which is Hilbert Communications, did not make the payments, then Price County would be obligated to do so. But within that same respect, Price County would have first position to take any assets that Bug Tussle had put into Price County, and they would take ownership of those assets.
So I guess in my mind, the county is not going to be outlaying any taxpayer money unless Bug Tussle fails. I mean, that's a pretty simple statement, but
In the big picture, yes, but I want to be very careful, and I don't want to gloss in the respect that if Price County issues bonds, then those are bonds that are, while not part of the legal debt obligation, those are bonds that are then made available to Bug Tussle for reimbursement. So you would be holding on to those funds. And then once we ask for that reimbursement, those funds are then withdrawn and paid I keep saying Kewaunee County, to Bug Tussle for payment of the work that was done on the Price County project. So from a legal standpoint, I don't want to say that county funds have not been expended. I want to say that because the county has issued debt and that debt is being used in the form of a loan, that most people, and if I was sitting in a chair somewhere, I'd be saying that's county funds. So I don't want to get cute and say that it's not, because I don't think that would be fair. And then that's just me trying to be slick.
Andy, did you want to chime in? We've had some legal side of questions.
Instead of Scott constantly looking at.
You guys can share the mic.
Yes. Can we get the diagram up on the board there? Because this is not your typical financing transaction. By the way, I'm Andy Phillips with Atolis Law. I'm hired to represent the county as special counsel in relation to this transaction. And so my relationship is with the county to evaluate the transaction itself and provide
I interject
information.
one thing.
Yes.
Right now, you're not being paid by the county either. Bug Tussle's paying you.
Why do you have to say that on the record? You
Just
make it
so
sound
the
so bad,
taxpayers
Mr.
know.
Chair. Yes, Bug Tussle is taking care of all fees associated with this, mine and anybody else. And so Bug Tussle is coming into this transaction saying, Price County, we want to make sure you're comfortable with this and that we're going to pay the fees of the experts, so to speak, to come in and assist the county through the process. So yes, they are paying my fees, right, Mitch? Thank you. All right.
One, if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So just a note off of that, putting that on the record.
Yes.
Also for the record, if my understanding is correctly, that we chose you. Bug Tussle did
Correct.
not choose you.
Correct.
They're paying your salary, but we chose you as our
Correct.
representative.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
Yes, and I think I'm probably a familiar face to many of you. I've been representing counties for going on 30 years now, and we have a public finance team in my firm that does bond issues like this all the time. And so we're evaluating it both from the standpoint of making sure that from a county perspective, you're well protected, because that's what I do all the time. And then from a finance perspective, that the deal structure makes sense. And so that's kind of the combination that we bring to the table. I thought it'd be good because in your packet, you have a diagram, and that diagram is something that we prepared. This isn't a Bug Tussle document. This is an Atolis document. And what this does is it explains the transaction setup, if you will. This is different than your normal transaction. You're not borrowing $10 million to build a new highway shop. You're not issuing bonds to generate $10 million to build a new highway shop. Here you are asked to sit in a guarantor capacity. You're not even issuing any bonds. Price County is not issuing any bonds in this situation. You're merely guaranteeing an issue that Fond du Lac County is making. And you sit there and say, well, wait a second, how is it that Price County is guaranteeing an issue that Fond du Lac County is authorizing? Well, let's back up a second. The easiest way to explain this from a conduit borrowing standpoint or a conduit revenue bond standpoint is to say that the IRS at the federal level has created certain instances where municipal entities can authorize borrowing that is going to qualify for tax exempt status for the people who buy the bonds that are issued by the municipality. We have no input on any of that. The feds just say, okay, this qualifies for tax exempt status. And so you're authorized to issue bonds that investors then can claim tax exemption on the interest earned on those bonds. What does that do? It lowers the cost of borrowing. And so it's a very attractive investment for the investor, and it lowers the cost of capital for the borrower. The conduit bond is simply a mechanism for the private borrower to get access to that tax exempt market. The way that they get access is through a municipal issuer like Price County, like Fond du Lac County. WIDA bond issues, WIFA bond issues, if you've heard of those state agencies, those are the conduit vehicles where borrowers and investors get access to the tax exempt market. So in this circumstance, what we have is Fond du Lac County acting as the lead issuer here to get Bug Tussle access to the tax exempt market to, again, lower the costs of capital. Instead of Bug Tussle going to 10 different counties and saying, Price County and the 9 other counties, I want you to issue these revenue bonds, which we're on the hook for, get us access to the tax exempt market and put the transactions together county by county by county, they are putting all of the counties together into one bond issue, with Fond du Lac County being the lead county issuer. And you might say, well, why are they doing that? Well, there's a very simple reason. You lower the costs associated with financing the more that you have put together. Can you imagine 10 different closings, 10 different sets of documents, 10 different, all of this? All of a sudden the cost starts getting higher and higher. And so Bug Tussle has put together a program along with Fond du Lac County that says we're going to have one bond issue and we're going to have 9 other counties participating in that bond issue. And it's going to be one set of closing costs, one set of other costs, and so on. So that's why it is happening the way it's happening. And so when you look at the actual structure of the transaction, we've got an agreement called a bond indenture between Fond du Lac County as the bond issuer and U.S. Bank as the trustee. That indenture merely authorizes Fond du Lac County to issue the bonds, and then it also directs U.S. Bank what to do with the proceeds of the bonds once the bonds are sold, okay? So U.S. Bank is holding all of the money when the bonds are sold. Well, Bug Tussle wants that money because they want to develop the project. And so they're going to enter into a loan agreement with U.S. Bank. And under that loan agreement, it dictates how they get access to those funds. One of the very important points that Scott pointed out earlier is that for the infrastructure in Price County, they don't get paid the amount that it requires them to install the infrastructure until Price County signs off and says, yep, requisition is okay. They're doing what they said they would do under the loan agreement. So that gives you, Price County, control over the project here in Price County. Okay, so it's going to be built. Bug Tussle is going to access funds as needed, as defined in the indenture through a requisition process that Price County has to authorize. And I assume that's going to go through Nick. And so Nick is going to look at the map. He's going to look at the invoice. He's going to look at the requisition request and say, yep, everything checks out. So that's the protection to make sure that the money that Bug Tussle is drawing down from U.S. Bank is being spent for the purposes that it's required to be spent under the loan agreement. And so then we look at the loan agreement, and not only is it a process for Bug Tussle to draw down funds from the trustee, but it's also a process for Bug Tussle to pay money back to the trustee, because at some point the bondholders are going to say, I'm owed debt service on my investment. And so Bug Tussle is primarily responsible, and in fact singularly responsible, for repayment on that loan so that the trustee can make payment out to the investors on these bonds. And so the question was, well, what happens if Bug Tussle fails to make a payment? It's not broken down with the payments county by county. It's one payment. And that's the beauty of this mechanism, is that if you're going to coordinate all the different counties, it's going to be a simplified system with one payment. So if they miss a payment, it's not like we can say Bug Tussle missed a payment on Price County, Bug Tussle missed a payment on Marathon County. We don't do that. They missed a payment on the bond issue that was authorized by Fond du Lac County. And so if that happens, if Bug Tussle misses a payment, the first place that the trustee is going to go to, because U.S. Bank, remember, has an obligation to pay out to the bondholders, first place U.S. Bank is going to look for money is the debt service reserve fund created under the indenture. And it's just as the name sounds. It's a debt service reserve, so that investors have some level of comfort that if Bug Tussle fails to make a loan payment, there is a pot of money over here from which the trustee will draw in order to make debt service payment on the bonds. Awesome. Well, you can't fund the debt service reserve with the full amount of the bonds. Otherwise, what's the point of having a bond issue, right? And so we know that that debt service reserve fund is going to have a ceiling. There's only going to be so much money in there, so that if Bug Tussle consistently fails to make payments when due under the loan agreement, that debt service reserve fund is eventually going to be depleted.
Who
So
funds that debt service reserve?
it's funded at closing. It's funded out of bond proceeds, and there are IRS rules about how much you can fund out of bond proceeds into that debt service reserve. And I don't want to get too far into the finance weeds, and maybe Mitch can if he'd like to, but essentially you've got limits on what the IRS says you can put into debt service reserve, and also capitalized interest. And the other reason capitalized interest, you have a fund there for Cap I, or capitalized interest, is because Bug Tussle's not generating revenue while they're building the infrastructure necessary to generate the revenue. Investors, IRS, everybody recognizes this, and so they allow you to borrow money to place into these funds to carry you through that interim period before you start generating the revenue necessary to support the bonds. And so that's essentially what it is it's funded out of bond proceeds. You're borrowing money so that you can set it aside to carry you through that interim period when you're not generating the revenues. That's what I'm getting to, Mr. Kopish. Thank you. Good segue, as always. You're reliable. That's one thing. And so when we talk about the county guarantee, this isn't a situation where essentially as soon as Bug Tussle misses a payment, that the county is on the hook for that payment. I know that it's capped at $15 million, and I understand that it's tied back to the value of the project in Price County, but it's really a refunding mechanism or a mechanism to reimburse that debt service reserve fund when it gets depleted, okay? So yes, it's 15 million plus 8% interest on that 15 million. So it's not capped at 15 million, it's 15 million plus interest. And I want everybody to understand that. But the steps that are required to go through to get to that county guarantee, there are other funds available to pay for debt service before we ever get to that guarantee. Now, if we think about, I'll get back to this diagram, if you will, because this is where we get into this whole concept of the guarantee agreements and the reimbursement agreements. And so if we think about the county guarantee on that 15 million as reimbursing the debt service reserve fund because it's been depleted because there have been a series of missed payments, county makes good on whatever its share is, and it's called the pro rata share because, of course, this is a single bond issue with 10 different counties, and each county is responsible for its pro rata share. And so essentially the trustee would say, look, we're short X million dollars in the debt service reserve fund, so I'm going to put a call out to all of the counties, and the trustee has to perform a calculation to say this is how much each county owes. And so then the trustee puts out a call and says within 150 days or 5 days before the next debt service payment is due, whichever is more time, that's when we need the money. And so you send the money in, and that's the county risk. That's the dollars that Price County would have to spend is to replenish that debt service reserve fund. When that happens, then we have a couple of things as well that happen. We have these reimbursement agreements in place. The reimbursement agreement says Bug Tussle is going to reimburse you for any dollar that you spend in replenishing that debt service reserve. You're going to look at me and say, well, what good is that? They didn't make the debt service payments. How are they going to reimburse us? Very good point. That's a really good point. I mean, it could happen. They could have magic cash flow that wasn't there 2 months ago that comes in that all of a sudden allows them to repay you. That could happen. But the more powerful what could happen is the guarantee from Hilbert Communications. That's the parent company of Bug Tussle. They're essentially guaranteeing all of the obligations that Price County is entering into as a result of this transaction, so that if the worst happens, we miss debt service payments, we have a depleted debt service reserve fund, we have a trustee that is saying, county, you owe us this much money. And we have Bug Tussle saying, I can't make good on the reimbursement agreement. We have Hilbert Communications stepping in and saying, we'll make good on that. We'll pay the county. And so then the question becomes, well, what is the financial wherewithal of Hilbert Communications? I'm not an underwriter. I don't evaluate credit risk. And so I can't give you an opinion on Hilbert Communications. Perhaps Mr. Felt or Mr. Olson can do that. But from what I've seen, and they have provided, I think, audited financials through 23. Is that right, Nick?
That's
So you
correct.
can evaluate the financial wherewithal of Hilbert to make good on it, they're a pretty significant, substantial company. You can evaluate that on your own from a risk standpoint as to what you want to do. The other component that we have at play here is that we have a bond insurer. And so you think about a deal that has basically triple coverage here. It has coverage from both the county and Hilbert, but then it also has an insurance company that's stepping up and saying to the investors, if we miss debt service and everything else fails, we're going to step up and we're going to make payments as the insurance company. You're guaranteeing the amounts that the insurance company pays, by the way, but it's not really a different guarantee than what you've already got with the debt service reserve fund. And so in reality, that guarantee also is capped at 15 million plus interest, but it's not going to come into play in my estimation unless you fail to make the payments on the guarantee to the trustee, which you owed that money anyways. And so I like to think of Price County's position here as guaranteeing $15 million plus interest in the debt service reserve fund to support the bond issue. And you might say, well, why do they do all this? Why do they have both a guarantee from the county, a guarantee from Hilbert, and bond insurance? Well, it's to enhance the credit rating of the bonds so that when they go out to market, they can go out there with a bond rating that is higher than what you might expect without that type of bond insurance. Again, I'm not an underwriter. I'm not a financial advisor, so I'm not telling you what the actual impact is, and I'm not giving advice about what this means. I'm just telling you that from the perspective of your lawyer, this is why things are set up the way that they are set up, okay? And so, again, in my mind, and I'll pause here in a second. In my mind, we have to separate the three different things that we are dealing with here. Number one, we're dealing with a finance vehicle that is different than typical. You have to be comfortable that the finance vehicle makes sense in your mind such that you can support it because you are being asked to enter into an intergovernmental agreement to allow Fond du Lac County to issue bonds, and you are going to be guarantor on a portion of those bonds. So number one, you have to be comfortable with the financing vehicle. Number two, you have to be comfortable with the guarantee. That means that you have to be comfortable that if everything comes crashing down, that you are going to be on the hook for $15 million plus interest on this bond issue. Now, you do get that mortgage, you do get a leasehold mortgage on all of the infrastructure that is placed. So that's going to be yours. I don't know the value of it. I don't know what that is worth. Those towers, whether partially built or fully, I don't know, but you are getting that mortgage, all right? So I know that. The third consideration is, well, what's our alternative? And I think that the commenter brought that up. Are there other entities that are willing to step up and say, we'll do this in a different way that is more efficient and less risky for the taxpayers of Price County? I don't know the answer to that. That's a policy decision. That's why you all get the big bucks, all right? What I do know is that that's not the same situation in every county. I know there are counties that are included within this bond issue that may have a different analysis as it relates to the what if we don't do this, what happens next. So I don't know what the answer is in terms of where you go from here and the importance of this project from a policy perspective. But to me, those are the three different things that we need to think about. And of course, I'm here and happy to answer any questions that you have about both the guarantee and the financing mechanism. Happy to answer all of those questions, but ultimately you just have to get comfortable with all of that to make an informed decision.
It's Bob Kopish. Andy, all of that said, and it's almost as clear as mud. I mean, there's a lot of issues
That hurts,
here.
Bob. That hurts.
I know, but
You're supposed to say good job, Andy.
Most of us don't understand how all this works and where the money, how the money flows and all that kind of stuff. It's even with that 8%. So we're guaranteeing $15 million plus 8%. So now it's up to 16.2.
Well, perhaps.
That's what I heard.
Perhaps. It is.
Okay.
The interest that's on there is the rate associated with the bonds capped at 8%. That's the
You got
maximum.
that fund that you have to have.
The debt service reserve fund. That's right.
Okay.
Because, and I'll tell you why, the investors are going to say, well, it's not good enough that we have a debt service reserve fund that's static. If we're 20 years from now and we have a default, then we want to make sure that we have interest. That's the reason.
Now, there's the thing here, Exhibit A, that was on a initial resolution that we got at the last board meeting. It says the bonds shall never constitute an indebtedness of Price County.
That's correct.
somewhere in here, it sounds like we're going to be on the hook.
Well,
But we're going to have to rely on somebody else stepping up to cover it.
that's the guarantee, is that if I said, Price County, you got to cut a check for $15 million to me tomorrow, where are you going to find that money?
I don't know.
Right? Probably going to have to issue bonds,
Nick might have to kick in.
right?
Yeah.
You know, you're probably going to have to issue bonds at that point or borrow from somebody, no doubt about it. And that's why the guarantee itself counts against your constitutional debt limitations as a county. It does because of the existence of that general obligation pledge. What you are saying is that we are backing our guarantee with a full faith and credit of Price County.
Right.
So yes, the bonds are not a debt of the county, but the guarantee is.
Yeah, but there is a situation where nobody can pay.
Mhm.
Hilbert can't pay, Bug Tussle can't pay.
Mhm.
We're responsible in the end. We got assets now, which may not even add up to what the debt is,
Right?
but we're going to be on the hook.
Yep.
So again, is that a true statement?
Well, the
Never
bonds,
constitute
Yeah.
an indebtedness to Price County.
well, the bonds will not, but the guarantee is. So, I mean, it's potato,
Okay.
potato.
To me, as
Yes.
a taxpayer, that sounds deceptive. Because
Well,
I
and
would read this and say, hey, there's no risk to me as a taxpayer.
And let me tell you, from a finance perspective,
is.
I can understand why it says that because Fond du Lac County is issuing the bonds. Even Fond du Lac County's statements say that they are not responsible for the bonds because the loan agreement says that Bug Tussle's responsible for payment on the bonds.
Yeah.
But we know that it's backed by a guarantee. And so we're not primarily responsible, but it's kind of like when I signed on my son's car loan recently. I know that I better be ready to cut that check at some point if he doesn't pay.
Yep, exactly.
He's the obligor, he's the debtor, yes, but I'm the guarantor. and
Yep.
So I better be prepared to pay
Yep.
if that happens.
Yeah, okay.
Do you want to talk about PMA and how they're, because you talked about the finances, we are working with PMA, which is, we use them as a county, but I don't know, did we get a final count? Is it 4 or 5 counties that
I
have?
think it's 5, but Mitch, do you know of how many? Right. It's 4 or 5.
Yeah, so just so you know, when we got all the financial information, obviously it's above most of our heads as generalists. So we did work, or we're working with Eric from PMA to give us some type of analysis. Is this going through the roof? Is there, what's it look like from a professional financial standpoint?
Is that other intergovernmental agreement we signed 2 years ago or whatever, PMA Financial?
Yeah, and they are, what are they? They're investment advisor.
Is that the WISC for?
Yeah,
the
yeah.
pooled investment,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Because I remember they were associated with BlackRock, right?
I don't recall.
I don't think they're associated with BlackRock. They were family-owned independent. I didn't think they were BlackRock.
I don't know.
I thought I remember reading that back then.
And to Nick's point, essentially what Bug Tussle has to do to support a revenue bond issue like this is come up with financial pro formas that establish the cash flows necessary to support the bonds. You can't just borrow bonds. You have to say, look, I want to borrow this money and here's how I'm going to repay it. So Bug Tussle prepared those financial pro formas and broke them down by county as to the anticipated revenue. And I think the PMA is going to take a look at the pro formas and say, do the numbers foot? Do they add up? Does this make sense? They're also going to take a look at, I think, the parent financials from Hilbert and say, does this make sense? And so to Nick's point, I think that there are 4 or 5 counties that are, including Price, that are going through that type of an analysis to say, essentially, are there any significant red flags that we ought to be concerned about here? But I will tell you as your lawyer, I mean, honestly, Mr. Kopish said it, think about this as a $15 million spend. And if we never have to spend that money, awesome. But in the worst case scenario, are we comfortable as a county moving forward with a $15 million spend? And that's, again, that's a policy question. That gets to the third point that I made. What do we do if we don't have Bug Tussle come in and put up towers and run fiber? What do we do? And I think that's a different question for Price County than it is for any of the other counties involved in this transaction.
Right. So we did do the analysis. If there was a default and all $15 million was owed, because it may not be 15, we looked at what about $1 million payment, because at that point it'd be 20 years, right? You're not going to default year 1 for 30 years out. We figured 10 years. If you owned a $200,000 home, it would be about $88 a year in a payment. So property value, $200,000, or your assessment for the taxes be $88, which is couple bucks a month. So that's kind of another way to look at it, is we're receiving this infrastructure if we had to make the payment, this is what the payment effect would be. Yes, it's $15 million, but it's not day one. You don't come up with 15 day one.
Well, and I'll let Scott and Mitch address it too. It's my understanding that the project and the infrastructure is designed to allow co-location for emergency services, sheriff's office, and so on, co-location for other providers as well. They can speak to that more. But in other words, it's not just a standalone system that if Bug Tussle were to exit stage right, that we're left with a tower that really does nothing except intrude upon our ability to look over the landscape. So
Just to touch on the public commenter's question about legalities, as far as obviously this isn't a capital improvement bid let project, something like that. I'm assuming if there was a legality issue with doing this with one person, that would have came up already. But as long as we got you standing here, I'll ask the question.
yeah, no, there's no requirement that this be bid, RFP'd, or anything. I think that Bug Tussle has come up with what I think is, and I hate to use the term creative in the finance industry because the finance industry doesn't like creativity. They like solid performing assets and financing models. But they've come up with a way to combine resources from a public-private partnership standpoint that makes sense. I see issues like this happen across the country. I've been involved in projects that don't go well. I've been in projects that do go well. I don't see anything in the setup of this project. I'm not speaking to the financial wherewithal of Bug Tussle or Hilbert, but in terms of the setup, this is, in my estimation, a good financing mechanism. You want me to sit down?
Or you'll come up later probably. To also answer your question, supervisors, we've been having projects like this since 2020 and before, and never once has a competitor filed a suit. And again, part of the reason why is because from a legal standpoint, counties have a lot of discretion as to who they decide that they want to enter into an agreement with. So I know there's also a question regarding, I guess when it comes to, if I'm going to understand correctly and nod or tell me otherwise, I think the biggest concern that this board has is what happens when the worst happens? What about us being on the hook? It's that fear of what could happen. And I understand that. And you should be thinking about that because you serve the public and you want to make sure that the public's best interest is being held. I can tell you that with any capital project, whether that's doing it for broadband and towers, or that's building a jail, whether that's putting up a road, all of those have risk. You could have a contractor that decides that they're going to build a building and halfway through, they then go belly up. Now, what does the county do? So there is always that risk. What we've tried to do, and as Andy has so well explained much better than I, we have tried to put in different layers of protection that will allow the board to give a certain level of comfort as to what could happen if the worst would happen. And so with that, we've been doing projects like this since 2020 and before, and we have not once missed a payment, nor do we ever plan to. I know that there are also questions regarding public-private funding. As a county, as local governments, whether you may be aware of it or not, you do public-private projects all the time. Does the county have a revolving loan fund? For those counties that do, that's a public-private partnership. You have many cities that when they're doing economic development projects, they'll give low interest or no interest loans to the company that is coming to locate within their jurisdiction. They may build a road. They may buy the land. All of those are types of public-private partnerships. We're doing the same type of thing in that we're asking for a loan so that way we can provide this project to Price County. Another issue that I know that was brought up has to do with overruns because of what happened in Marathon County. And that is absolutely a fair question. As with many capital projects, it is not uncommon for there to be overruns. What had happened in Marathon County is a couple different things. One had to do with, as we started this project, we were met with much more rock than what we anticipated. And when you deal with rock and rock boring, that can add onto the cost of a project about 10x. So that cost an additional $3.5 million just alone to bore the rock in Marathon County. We also had inflationary issues during COVID. And also finally, we had a subcontractor that did not do the job as we had expected. That contractor has been let go, and we brought in our own folks. We have a nationally known company in Michael's Corporation that is doing a lot of our work for us. They do this type of work all over the country. We have now retained them, and we expect them to do a lot of our work from this point forward. I guess if there are other questions, I can try to answer them, or Andy can, or Mitch can. Supervisor.
Yeah, Jeff Hallstead from District 4. So this is kind of a question for Andy and Mitch and you, Scott, all together. So Hilbert Communications is the parent company.
Correct.
You have Bug Tussle 1, who is part of Hilbert, who is the other tranche, the other areas you've worked. Bug Tussle 2 is now what Price County would be part of. So I guess failure has been the key topic here so far today. Has Bug Tussle 1's performance met your expectations at Bug Tussle to where you feel very comfortable with your pattern that you're going forward with, your take rates? Is it profitable for the parent company, Hilbert? Obviously wouldn't be supporting Bug Tussle 1 and saying, let's do Bug Tussle 2 if we thought it was going to fail. So Bug Tussle 2, we are part of it with 10 other counties.
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, Supervisor, is that if this wasn't working well, then Hilbert wouldn't be adding on additional subsidiaries. We also, as Hilbert Communications, we also have a company that builds towers. We also have an excavating company. We also have companies that deal with spectrum. So as we continue to move on to these projects, yes, Hilbert is continuing to have Bug Tussle 2 as well as Bug Tussle. We continue to meet the milestones that we're looking for. Of course, in my estimation, I would always like them to be faster than what they originally are, but we continue to make progress, and we will continue to make progress.
So if Bug Tussle 2 failed, Bug Tussle 1, there would be no effect.
Correct.
If I can.
Sure.
Just yeah, we'll get a little bit lawyered here. So as you know, there's the Bug Tussle 1 special purpose entity, which is associated with the first indenture, the term that Andy mentioned, which is the agreement between the company and the issuer in Fond du Lac County. As condition on one of the tranches that we issued, the insurance provider, which again Andy mentioned, put a term in that document requiring that they approve any subsequent debt issued to that special purpose entity. So when we hit the limit on the first indenture with Fond du Lac County, which was $240 million, and we had the opportunity to go back to Fond du Lac County to talk about another indenture and another $250 million, we had the opportunity to create an additional special purpose entity, Bug Tussle 2, to get around the requirement that BAM put on it to have to approve any additional indebtedness. So the distinction between Bug Tussle 1 and Bug Tussle 2 isn't particular to anything we do internally, is just a way for us to kind of reset the deck with the insurance company so that we don't need BAM's approval to do the things that we want to do. At the end of the day, and as again, Andy went through, the primary guarantee here is from the special purpose entity, and that is from the revenues that the project generates. Really, the financials that you should be evaluating and that you have the documentation to do so is Hilbert Communications. It's not really, it's the revenue from the project primarily, but from a history and from an ongoing operation standpoint is how do we feel about Hilbert Communications, and how do we feel that in the event the project doesn't go to plan, how likely is that going to fall on us? A little bit fox in the hen house for me to answer, but I'll say that of the work that we are doing, the bond projects and the middle mile transport fiber and things that we are funding through our public-private partnerships is moving forward about a third of what we're doing. The primary or the other two main business lines that we have are going to be fiber to the home projects along the middle mile that we're doing, that we're privately funding. So obviously the math on those projects is a little bit different than the math on this project because of population density. So we're going to be a little choosier on where we're putting fiber. It's going to be in more dense areas, something that makes sense for us to fund privately. But that's kind of fiber to the home into the future is one line. The other big thing that we do is our relationship with AT&T at this point, but hopefully additional carriers in the future, and what we call our carrier services program. So currently we operate a little over 500 sites through Wisconsin and Iowa for AT&T, and that makes up a big part of the business that we have, and we'll continue to invest our private money in that, which would include what we do on the cellular side in Price County once we continue to develop that relationship with AT&T. And then the third arm being this bond program. So that is to say, because you have the parent company guarantee from Hilbert Communications, that would be letting, if we let the bond program fail, is letting a third of our business attack the other 2/3. Is to say that if we are committing all of our assets on more than half of what we're doing on the other side, we have way too much at stake to let the bonds become the part that drags the entire company down as a whole.
Can you talk about, so there's the resolution's a request for up to 15 million. Do you have an estimate? I think the big concern is like Marathon County, you gave them a number, it happened to go over. Is the 15 million going to be the same thing, like 15 million and we're going to go over, or how'd you come up with 15, I guess is the
So how we came up with 15 was primarily looking at what the project size that we wanted to do in Price County is based on the fiber that we want to put in, the distribution last mile we want, the connections we want to make, as well as the towers we want to build. And that plus the cost of issuance and plus the cost of capitalized interest rounds up to a $15 million project. As we sit today, in the event you guys authorize that the final resolution go forward in a project amount not to exceed $15 million, $15 million in bonds will be issued. That's how we think about it. That's what it is. The up to language has a storied history that we don't necessarily need to get into, but really at the end of the day, it'll be a $15 million project in the event that's what you authorize. Marathon County, as has been discussed a little bit, is a pretty unique situation. For one, it was part of the first tranche of bonds that we've done. So there was a lot of learning on the go, not necessarily the first tranche of bonds, but the first major fiber project that we did. So there was a lot of learning on the go, a lot of figuring out which subcontractors were worth trusting and which weren't, as well as a lot of figuring out how good an idea you have about the project before you really engage in the process. So those bonds were issued in late 2021. We set the budget for the initial resolution, I want to say in March of 2021, and continued to have meetings with the county, continued to have meetings with both arms of their towns associations. And as Mr. Barkstrom mentioned, that's where the real expansion to go from what was budgeted about 200 miles to about 400 miles kind of took place. So from issuance, we knew that the amount of bonds that were issued were not going to cover the entire scope of what had really been put on paper at that point. And so coming back to Marathon County this year was an expected transaction. There's another part of that in a PSC loan, in a PSC grant that we agreed to fund a matching component through another financing transaction that is also worked into this issuance. So that's another 100 miles of project expansion in Marathon County. But that is to say, and as Supervisor Hastings mentioned earlier, is we will be back as often as you have an appetite for it. If you look at the project as it has gone and you would like to continue and you would like to expand into the north, that's absolutely something we'd entertain, and something that, as long as the math pencils, will come back and we'll do as much work as you'll have us for. What we know today is that the $15 million is definitely a good start. It's a good project from the cellular standpoint. It's a good addition of fiber in the areas outside of where fiber already exists, centralizing on Phillips. Certainly not the end all be all, certainly is not going to provide fiber to the home service to 100% of the people of the county, but that's where you look to leverage grant opportunities through BEAD, notably as the next issuance up, and continued private investment. But as we sit today to build what we have put out today, that's going to cost up to $15 million. If the project changes, which would be conversations we have with you, we can come back, but that's not our intention today.
Mitch,
Mr. Kopish.
Bob Kopish again. Could you explain the capitalized interest? That's been brought up a couple of times here today.
Yeah,
Would
absolutely.
you explain what that is?
So capitalized interest is, as Attorney Phillips mentioned, part of the financing mechanism to cover the fact that the revenue isn't generated right away. So the actual bonds that are issued is a package of bonds of varying maturities. It's not just, I'm going to issue $15 million worth of bonds that mature in 30 years. There are 2, 3, 5, 7, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. How all of that structure works is to amortize the payments on level terms for the repayment cycle of the bonds. And I don't know that I'm helping or hurting at this point, but that is to say is you're issuing longer term debt that is paying off or you're issuing shorter term debt that's going to make the interest payments on the longer term debt. And it all kind of boils down to really at the end of the day, and it's U.S. Bank's job as the trustee to kind of manage this thing, is there's no payments due for the first 3 years, which that's what the capitalized interest refers to, is you're issuing enough money in the bonding to cover those first 3 years of interest payments. Then we step in for interest only years 4 and 5, and then principal and interest on a level term for the remaining 25 years.
So that capitalized interest from those first 3 years is part of the 15 million.
Part of the 15.
That's okay. Thank you.
Yep. Mr. Bergstrom.
We keep talking about cell towers, and isn't it true that you're going to put up towers, but they're really going to be internet towers? And it's going to be a risk that somebody is going to come along and put up so that I can make a phone call with my phone, and that might not ever happen.
In the literal sense, yes, there is a risk that doesn't happen. In our current relationship with AT&T, I can say to you with 99% certainty that is going to happen. We have a convoluted mess of a relationship with them because, and not to not use the word Andy said, I like the word creative, so I'm going to continue to use it. But a lot of the progress that we've made with AT&T has been in our creative deployment strategies. We have some sites that we operate with AT&T that we both have to agree on, and we have some sites that we operate with AT&T just because we want to. And living where I live now and coming from where I came from before, I have a very high priority in providing cellular coverage to Price County. And through the flexibility we have with AT&T is there's going to be cellular coverage in Price County come hell or high water. At the end of the day is if we were just building wireless internet towers, there's 3 classes of towers that you can build, 1, 2, and 3. Carriers require at least a class 2 tower. So that is what we build as class 2 towers so they can support carrier equipment and they can support cellular connectivity.
How much are those a piece?
We average about $215,000 for a tower that we build. If you step down to a class 1 tower, you can shave $50,000 or $60,000 off. It's a little bit of a pain because the tower itself is significantly cheaper, but the regulatory and environmental hurdles do not get any cheaper. So you're still spending $50,000 between zoning and making sure the federal government's okay with what you're doing. On average, though, to build a 300-foot guide tower, it's $215,000.
Yeah, Mitch, the commenters mentioned we should be putting money into EMS instead of doing this. Can you highlight a little bit how your towers will help our EMS? And then maybe the sheriff could say if that's something it's going to work for him or not work for him.
Yeah, as Scott has mentioned previously, is there is space reserved on the towers for Price County to deploy whatever equipment they see fit. That's a program that we've had going for a long time that predates our bonding program, but has come together with a little more earnest as we continue to develop our partnerships with counties. In reality, the coverage you get from a tower has a lot to do with the height of the tower, but as well as the radio equipment that you're utilizing. But in a realistic sense, from straight line coverage 5 or 6 miles is kind of where you are reliably able to make connectivity and have coverage. So it does take a number of towers throughout the county to provide coverage in the spaces that you need it. It is obviously a concern and a consideration when we were placing the towers throughout the county. Fortunately, from a workload standpoint, is Price County does not have a lot of towers. There are a lot of areas where you do need to build new towers in order to expand coverage. I can let the sheriff speak to what his request is and how he looks to have the county continue to have service developed based on the towers that we're putting up there. But it's the one place where I would push back on the public comments, and where I would encourage. I don't know if you guys use GenCom, Andy, or excuse me, Nick,
Not that I
or
know.
who your radio service provider is, but it does take a number of towers to provide a usable level of coverage throughout the county.
Yeah, and I think that we use, well, Northway puts it up, but Motorola, I believe, is the equipment. And it sounds good, like, cool, higher tower, it can see further. The problem is the equipment gets more expensive the more you have to project it. So like the equipment we put on there covers 10 square miles. If we wanted to go to 50 square miles, the equipment costs 10 times more. So, and just even to get the license to broadcast and all that stuff. But sheriff is here, chief deputy is here if they want to speak towards why we're interested in the emergency management side of this.
And then
They both look at each
maybe-
other. Like,
maybe-
Before Brian starts talking, I'll address that just a little bit coming from an equipment standpoint. If we have 4 repeaters in the county and one goes down, we're not down a service. If we have 1 repeater in the county and it goes down, we're out everywhere. So if we have 4 repeaters, they will still work and we'll still have some type of coverage. So
and cell phone will be a backup. That's a big thing. Right now, we don't have that backup coverage.
And also, what exactly is Buck Tussle offering the county as far as, I guess, as an example, hanging equipment on the tower?
No, sure.
So the specifics of that, I love trading horses, and our relationship has varied a lot in that context. So effectively, what is in the documentation is the top 50 feet of the tower is reserved for commercial space. That's where the real value of the tower comes out. That's where you have your fixed wireless equipment as well as your commercial equipment mounted. Anything under that the county wants to utilize, fair game. In a typical orientation is 2 20-foot whip antennas with 20 feet of vertical separation. So kind of 60 feet of space is what the counties have used, as well as whatever space is necessary on the ground. Typically, our Bug Tussle equipment is mounted in cabinets. They're a lot more affordable. A lot of counties like to use shelters, which are a lot more expensive. With a couple of the counties we've partnered with, the county has bought the shelter, but we've paid for the installation, and then we co-locate in the space along with the county. There's, as with the project writ large, is all of the assets that we're investing in serve a lot of purposes. And so it very much makes sense to find a partner who has similar interests, who has similar needs. You need towers and we need towers. You need fiber and we need fiber. You need shelters and we need shelters. So to do all of these things with a partner, to do all the things together, is a good way for us to save money, to continue to make investment in Price County, and for you guys to save money. Mr. Braca.
So one more question before we make Brian get up and sit down again. So when you say utilize that lower space, when we're talking about utilize it no cost and no time frame limitation, or what are we talking as far as utilizing?
The facilities access agreement, the templates that in there, technically speaking, is subject to further negotiation between you and I. It's a 10-year original term with 2 10-year renewals at solely your election, which mirrors the lifetime of the bond. So it's your obligation to us is as long as our obligation to you. In the event you're asking me this question in 30 years, and I should still be here, I won't be a retirement age then, I have no problem extending it. This is not where we look to make money. Our relationship with the counties is a very substantial asset to us, and trying to squeeze a couple $1,000 out of you a month is not something that necessarily makes sense, or not something that is worth it. So from what we're able to do from our board and from our investment standpoint is make a commitment for the 30 years that you're committed to us. But I see no reason why that charge would come up 30 years from now.
Do you want to address, because that was a good lead to, we haven't talked about maintenance of towers and grounds.
Do you want to address that?
Absolutely. The assets at the end of the day are ours. It is our tower. It is our ground space under the tower. So we're 100% responsible for the maintenance and the operation of the tower sites. Now, where that gets a little bit different is your equipment is your equipment. And so you're responsible for keeping the power on there and keeping everything functioning there. But as far as retentioning guy wires and killing weeds and patching fences that trees fall on, all of that is our responsibility. They're our assets. Mr. Bergstrom.
Power, you're going to build the towers that there's going to be fiber between each tower, and you have to have electric to those powers. And I hear generators. Does that mean there's some generators are going to be running all the time?
No.
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 So where practical, I would assume that you're going to run an electric line out there.
Yep, absolutely.
Right, okay.
And is heavily one of the considerations we look
So
at where we're building our
The
towers.
electric bill for the equipment that we have on that tower is our bill.
Is your bill.
And
Is
including the
another
maintenance
horse
of
we're
our
willing to
equipment.
trade. Correct.
Yeah, okay.
So there's a handful of additional horse trades that we make in that space as well. So as Mr. Hallstrand can speak to, but generators are a valuable asset in emergency communications, both on the emergency management side and on the cellular side. Just because the power's out doesn't mean you want to stop talking to people. So whether or not you and I both need to buy a generator, whether there's something we work out there, the power configuration, if we're both running on the same generator, gets a lot easier if we're both running on the same meter. So maybe there's a cash contribution. Maybe we're paying for the power and you're paying for the generator. However it works out, definitely something that we're interested in entertaining, because again, there's no reason we're both spending $50,000 on a generator. Mr. Kopish.
Yeah, it's Bob Kopish again. Alan, you mentioned electricity and fiber to each tower. I believe I asked that question last time. You're not going to have fiber to all the towers.
There will not be fiber to every tower. No.
No. So imagine they're going to be closer to your main line, and up north there would not be anything because you don't have fiber up there, right?
We don't have fiber up there, but there are transport fiber opportunities up there. It's more than likely a handful of towers up there will also be connected to fiber.
Eventually.
Probably at onset, but yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Hastings?
I personally had a RLF loan, and with the private entity here, are we susceptible to open records requests? Because you're not if the RLF loan ain't.
What's the question?
RLF loans are not susceptible to open records requests. How do we stand with Bug Tussle being a private entity?
We're not subject to open records requests in the same manner that the county is. So that our relationship with the county and all of the correspondence not specifically privileged are open in the same manner that your books are generally open to the public. And so everything that is discussed in the meetings and all of the agreements and all of the relationship documents we have with you are subject to open view.
Right. So anything sent to me or the chair or anything you would have access to.
And Mitch, you can bring this up too, is that there, in addition, so yes, the relationship with Bug Tussle County, that's open book, same public records laws apply. In addition, associated with the bond issue, there are certain disclosure requirements that Bug Tussle has to make related to their financial performance and so on. And that's there's a long set of requirements there, and it's too much to get into, but there is going to be information made public as a result of that bond issue, because you can't just issue bonds through a public entity like Fond du Lac County and say, well, everything's secret. You have to disclose certain information.
Are you ready for the sheriff?
We do have two repeaters in the county, the south repeater and the north repeater. On occasion, they do go down. Recently, we had the north repeater go down. That is our communications tower for the north side. I think it was like $16,000 or $18,000 to replace that repeater, and it was an older repeater. We're fortunate to have the south tower, where the yearly rental is about $900 a year, which is very cheap. And at some point, that could be like $900 a month. But we've been very fortunate to have the repeater as such.
That's a total replacement, 16 to 18.
It was like 16 to 18,000 for the north repeater.
Yeah, and that's just the one box called a
Yes.
repeater. We still have all the
It's-
other equipment that goes with
Yeah,
it.
it's
Yeah,
like,
that's just like a switch. We have switches we replace up there. We have, it's dated equipment and it's been,
so when a repeater goes down, immediately we're notified. We then get a hold of Northway Communications. They then make it a priority to get up here. And if they don't have, because they don't hold repeaters at Northway, they don't, you send it out to be built. So they have loaners. So then we get a loaner put in. And then at that point, then once it's built, they bring the new one up and then they replace it and then they take the loaner back. So if we do have urgent issues, then we jump on the fire towers. So Pike Lake, we were up in Fifield, Eisenstein area. We had a missing gentleman, Alzheimer's. He was out towards the Pike Round Lake area, and we could not get outside the canopy on the north tower. So we jumped on the east fire tower, or the Pike Lake fire tower. And cell coverage was minimal. I had to get out from the woods and get out to the road at times. So we do have that an issue as large of a county as we have with the canopy that we have in the summer. So we do have consistent radio communication issues. Some of the portable radios, like Bob, I don't know if Bob has his on him, but that's end of life. They don't make it anymore. They don't service anymore. So as we lose a portable, we buy a portable. Squad cars, as we get new squad cars in, mobiles are replaced as we get new cars. So trying to minimize the impact overall to the budget.
I guess my question is what Bug Tussle offering fit the needs of the department and EMS?
It's potential. I'd like to see some of the reports on it and see where the coverages are and things like that. I know we have issues down in the Georgetown area, Kennan area, Eisenstein, of course, up in Town Lake, way up in the north, these outlying areas. But then again, you get behind Timms Hill, you can always have issues there. So, but yeah, it looks inviting. That's why I've spoken with Nick in regards to holding off on the central tower and having a tower sit, a 120-foot tower sit in the shadow of the water tower. So we could have central communications for Emory and Elk and try to communicate, I guess, in Price County better.
And what they're offering is going to be a cost savings?
That I would talk with Nick a little bit more on.
today, not necessarily, because like you said, we have access to one tower. And I don't know how that agreement came about, but they're very generous letting us on that one. If we were to expand our service to have better coverage, the average cost to go on a tower that's not ours, that's not Bug Tussle's, is between $1,500 and $2,500 a month. So it adds up real quick because they would use that space for other areas. That's where we would be saving, is in the long term. If we know we need something communications, because cell phones aren't here yet, we would be trying to find a place to put a tower, put up a tower, put the equipment on it, manage a tower instead of renting it. But renting gets very expensive.
So we're looking at portable. Bob and I are going to be looking at some portables that also are radio based, but LTE based cell. So we're going to start looking at how they're crossing technology and see if that could be of some benefit to us.
So how many towers are you looking to utilize? All of them that they build? And then what would be the cost of the stuff that'll go on, or is that at a later point?
Yeah, so we have not decided how many because it just depends on coverage. I would assume between 4 and 6 because some are near each other. You don't need duplicate based on whatever the equipment can cover. So in the end, we'll look at that. Part of being in this process, we get points based on the outstanding debt. So there's a payment to us through Bug Tussle for saying we're part of this process. That's probably what I would recommend go towards the purchase of the equipment and the sheds or the hutches, whatever we put the equipment in. So it'll be either a capital project short-term to pay it back with that. I don't know what each site would cost, but it's, again, still a better process than the long-term of putting up our own tower.
To answer your question, I'd love to have assets on every tower. And I'm sure like for highway, for us, for fire department, any EMS, they would love to have every inch of any tower they can get.
And that was gonna be my comment, just to go off of what Brian was saying. Well, it's $900 a year for sheriff, and obviously that's probably gonna increase here in the future. Highway also has, and I believe highway is close to 2,000 if I remember correctly for
Yeah.
that south tower. And then, to piggyback off that, I believe highway equipment is getting to end of life also. So these are all things to consider as we're going through.
Yeah, and then local EMS, we know they need the service or the availability. Fire departments, we've talked to a couple of them. They understand this would be a huge asset to the county for their equipment also.
We did apply for a PSAP grant, so hopefully we'll know more about $100 and some $1,000. It's a 90-10 split, so it's for equipment within the communications center. And so we're looking to hopefully see how that transplants. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Thank you, Brian. Go ahead.
I mean, any other questions? I mean, we have them here. This is when we should be asking.
I have a question. Is there any federal grants or do you apply for?
The next big grant program that's going to be available in the state of Wisconsin, and it's actually starting imminently here with some steps from the provider due at the beginning of October, is BEAD, which is roughly $1 billion, $1.055 billion allocated to the state of Wisconsin to do last mile projects. So that is something that we will continue to evaluate and hopefully be aggressive on, particularly in the areas where we are doing bond projects. The fundamental difference between BEAD and the project we're looking at here is we're looking, one, on the tower side is a different ball of wax that BEAD is probably not going to be a big player in. But two is the middle mile infrastructure we're building isn't something as a standalone project that would fit the criteria for BEAD, but does serve as a catalyst for branching off. So in the event you are trying to build 2 homes in Georgetown, either you have to build everything from where you're getting your fiber connectivity, assuming that you're getting it from the city of Phillips, from Norvato, or from Wynn. You're having to build all the way from here to Georgetown, or this project is building from here to Georgetown. So your grant application can be a lot more competitive because you don't have to have 10 miles of connectivity built into the front.
So there is no federal money for this project that you're
This project is entirely standalone. We'll continue to look to leverage grant opportunities as they become available, but right here in isolation, this is the project you're looking at. Mr. Bergstrom.
This pass out, did that include tower location? Does Nick have a copy of that?
Nick has a copy of that. I can circulate another. It hasn't changed in a while, so whatever you've gotten once upon a time is what you have. But I'd be happy to share something.
Occasionally.
Yeah, all I have, I think it was from when we first started talking about your general locations. If we could get an updated map to pass around, that would be good.
Sure, absolutely.
And I know we've talked several times, it's general location. You have to get a landowner to participate in that process. So.
Correct.
I'd like to personally see a copy of the bonds too themselves.
The bonds themselves won't be generated until they're sold. So you can for sure participate and watch the process as it happens, but that will not happen in advance of the final resolution because the bonds are not created until we're all the way through.
I think there is a specimen at the end of the indenture. And so that specimen will be what the bonds look like. The indenture is the document I talked about between between Fond du Lac County and US Bank. And that was, I believe, included in the packet of materials that bond counsel provided to the county, Nick.
Okay.
I'd like to see it, Nick.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, take a look at the end of the indenture. That will have a specimen of the bonds that will be issued, as I recall.
Thank you.
We know that in Marathon County, they had put together all of the preliminary stuff. So if you want 450 pages of documentation, we can give you all of that. That's not a problem. And I'm serious, 450 pages.
Yep.
So.
Any other questions?
Well, we were, I think at last meeting, we were going to get some financial data at this meeting. And that was brought up that we should be not too concerned about bug tussle, but Hilbert Communications. Do you have financial data to share with us?
I don't have anything. I mean, we got the audits when last Thursday, I think, or whenever it was.
Do they have 2024 wrapped up?
3.
It would be 23, and no, we
Yeah.
don't. So you have our audited
Right.
financials for 2021 and 22.
And 23?
Our audit has not been completed for 23.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I'm thinking 24. It's 23. Yeah, you're right. But do you have that information to share or?
It has been provided to PMA and to Nick.
But I thought that was part of what we were going to get done before we did anything.
Yep, that our goal is have PMA to review that and give us a summary.
Okay.
Do you want? I can.
Well, I think we should see that, don't you?
No, I agree. I'd like to see that.
Okay. I just was downloading the indenture document.
But if you have the financial statements,
So I have the audited financials. Which year do you want? Just 2022? I can bring.
well, the most recent, yeah.
Because ultimately Hilbert has to decide to fail before we're on the hook.
Correct. I can give you a brief summary on what you're going to see in our financials, especially looking over the time period that's provided. So effectively, you have from 2018 through 2022, because the 2020 financials have a 2-year look back in evaluating the data. And you'll see kind of the ebbs and flows of how our business was structured prior to our bond program pretty heavily in the early years of our financial statements. So through the late 10s, we were primarily, well, we're still an infrastructure company, but we were heavily engaged in tower development. And so as we would get contracts with AT&T and with other companies to construct towers and work through the process of developing, building, and then selling those towers, there are the word we use internally is our revenue is very lumpy. There are big years when there are a lot of towers that finish and sold, and there are leaner years when there are not a lot of towers sold. So our peak revenues have been driven by what the tower sale proceeds look like and how those hit our balance sheet. As if you look at our fixed wireless revenue, our fiber revenue, our carrier services revenue, that is a more stable growth trajectory. That's a flatter line. That's something you expect, but there are big jumps in our history from tower sales.
So I have the audit up. I did make copies, so if anybody wants one. The other thing is that pro forma stuff that came from legal. Is that attorney-client? I don't know what's allowed on that one.
No, that can be circulated to the board.
Okay, I'll bring that up next if I can grab it again. So it's 33 pages. So Hawkins Ash did the audit.
Send it over the email.
I printed off 15 copies that we can hand out, but is there a specific area you want to see? Total current assets from 2021 to 2022 went from 80 million to 125 million. Property and equipment went from 36 to 42. Non-current assets went from 20 to 147. So total assets is 368 million, 186,000. They have a line of credit of 3 million. Long-term debt. So they, in 2021, they went from 13 million to 42 million in current liabilities. Total liabilities of 337. Is there specific that you want to see? Revenues, 43 million. $2.9 million in profit. A loss in 2022 of
That shows a big loss. Now, how does that relate to what you just said?
Yeah, I mean, every dollar that comes in order to not pay taxes on it, we spend it on furthering infrastructure. So if you look through the financials, you'll see that there's a lot of movement in inventory and a lot of movement in assets and a lot of movement in pumping every dollar that comes out back in.
Cash flow issue and cash flow.
I'm talking everything is all of it makes it back in. And so what you have in your depreciation, what you have in your deductible business expenses, what you have in the operation of the business is everything makes it back in. So we run cash lean because we don't want to sit on a bunch of inventory. Every dollar in your bank account isn't making as much money as it does make in the field, whether that's in tower or fiber or equipment. But we're definitely not paying shareholder dividends or taking our ball and going home at any point. We're continuing to invest in the network, continuing to grow because that's what we're doing.
Right. So their cash position went from 70 to 118 at the end of the year, million. It looks like cash and restricted cash equivalent at end of year was 118 million compared to the prior year of 70 million.
Which the significant majority of that is bond proceeds.
Yeah, and
so as the bonds are issued, that hits the financial and the balance sheet as cash, but it's restricted cash.
Yeah, and they went from 1 year they invested $14 million. And the next year they invested $52 million in activity. So that was a significant jump. A lot of pages. So I printed it off. You can have a copy. I did open up.
So I guess I'm a pretty good person with cash, but I'm not an expert at all these things. And we've retained an attorney to review this.
No.
Andy,
PMA.
Well, PMA for the audit.
but
I went to law
Andy-
school because I couldn't do math. I just want to make that
Okay.
clear here. All right.
but is there anything on that report that jumped out at you?
No, it doesn't and that's why, again, PMA is going to take a look at this. And frankly, you have investors, you have underwriter, you have bond rating agency, all looking at this. And so when I talked earlier about the credit package, where we've got not only the county guarantee, but we've got bond insurance and we've got Hilbert guaranteeing the county guarantee. The very first thing anybody looks at is the pro forma. Does the anticipated revenue support the borrowing? That's the same thing as when we borrow money when we go to the bank and we want to buy a house. Show me proof of income. Show me what job you got. How long have you worked there? What's your annual salary? All of those things are going to tell the bank, can we support this loan? That's the same thing that the underwriter is going through as it relates to the pro formas on the revenues anticipated for this project. And then they're also looking at the Hilbert guarantee. Is that worth anything? We know the county guarantee is worth a lot. It's worth its weight in gold, frankly. This is being backed by the full faith and credit of the taxpayers of Price County at $88 per 200,000, based on what Nick said. We know that. But I don't think that alone is going to get you, and I'll let Mitch correct me because I'm not the expert on this, but I don't think that alone is going to get you the rating that you need for the bonds and the interest rate you want to see on those bonds. I think that that's going to be driven by not only the county guarantee, but also the pro forma on cash flows, and then the status of the Hilbert guarantee as well. So that's a very long-winded way of saying I don't evaluate financial statements, but nothing is jumping out at me as a big red flag.
So I do have the indenture of trust, Bug Tussle 2024. It's a lot of pages, but I will send that out if anybody wants to see that. And then I did open the pro forma.
It's usually an exhibit is the specimen. Maybe it's not, but I thought I recalled it. Perhaps I think the question was, I want to see the bond, right? That was the question. Yeah, there it is. That's the specimen bond. So that's what it looks like.
So I'll send that out. And then I also opened. Stop sharing.
Mitch, is Bug Tussle considered a public utility?
No, it is not. So we do engage in, obviously, in telecommunications, and so we're heavily involved in a lot of work that the PSC does, but it's not treated in the same way that electric utilities and gas lines are treated.
So what's up on the screen now is the pro forma that was given to us. These are the counties that are considered in, so there's 10 in this project. There's fixed wireless and there's fiber, so they broke that down between the two areas. And then if you look at Price County, the expectation, so 2024, there's two counties, Forest and Marathon, that would have individuals on the middle mile potentially, or whatever, the fiber. It looks like in Price County, they're estimating 100 users.
The top is fixed wireless. If you can.
Yeah, through the the wireless, however you want to put it. So the top, they have 100 the first year. By 2026, I'm assuming more towers would be on board. That'd be 160, and then they slowly ramp up with project completion. So that's how they utilize it. It does have everybody in there. So again, the wireless and the straight to the home, the fiber. They also have Price County on that. So along the trail, they add both areas up, and then they talk about their revenues. So like Price County, this is their expectations for the internet side of the business. And then it talks about down here.
Is there a list of counties that have declined your guys' agreements?
I can give it to you. So in our first series in 2021, Iron County elected not to participate in the program. In 2022, Clark County elected not to participate in the program, and in 2023, Forest County elected not to participate in the program. Forest County it has repassed their initial resolution and is again considering their final resolution on the 20th. Yeah, we've done towers in Iron County previously. So that's the list of counties that have passed their initial resolution and failed to pass their final resolution. Complete transparency, 100% fairness, is there are other counties that haven't gotten to the initial resolution stage, obviously. So I've engaged in conversations with a significant majority of the counties in Wisconsin, and those are the three that did not pass their final.
Well, yeah, what a deal for a small business.
So I can also send out this if anyone's interested. So any questions on the pro forma?
Paula, you have something?
Not on the performer. My hand went up just as your question came out. I do have a question. I'm sorry, Mr. Polachek, Supervisor Polachek isn't here at this time. He raised the question last time to you, Mitch, regarding towers and reception in the north of our county. And then I brought it up for the south. You know, I was in town of Knox last evening, which is Brantwood, for those of you who don't know. And they were concerned. They're just concerned that they're not going to be getting anything what's being planned. And so, and I did voice that as well, the concern of the southern part of the county, and Mr. Polachek talking about the northern part of the county. So when you're talking about this being a county-wide service, it's truly not fully county-wide. So that is a concern of my constituents.
There's obviously some level of coverage that it's you're not literally peppering the countryside with towers, but I'd still ride with the phrase countywide. Is we have a tower proposed. Well, we have a tower that is otherwise being built in Ogama. We have a tower that's being built in the southern town of Kennan. We have a tower in Catawba. There are existing towers on Spirit Lake. There's an existing tower near the county line, just on the Lincoln side near Triple I. So the need for additional towers in the town of Knox or in the Brantwood area isn't nearly as substantial as the need for a tower like the one we have proposed in Pike Lake, like the one we have proposed in the town of Brewster.
I can't tell my constituents that their need isn't any more important than someone else's.
100%, absolutely. But you can tell your constituents that how they have it today is better than how other people have it. And so that we can continue to expand the budget and continue to build more fiber and continue to build more towers to cover 100% of people. But at the end of the day, that's not something that necessarily makes economic sense. And that's not necessarily something that is really where the need is there's going to be improved coverage in the town of Knox from the tower that is being built in Ogama. There's going to be improved coverage in the north from the tower that we're planning on building. I lose track of the name, but west of Park Falls on Highway 70 from the tower that we're planning on building off County W, in Kimberly Clark from the tower we're planning on building on Pike Lake, from the tower we're planning on building on the northern part of Solberg in the town of Worcester. 10 towers go a long way for providing additional coverage. If they have difficulty with cellular reception in the town of Knox, a significant likelihood that's a provider problem, because AT&T has a tower in downtown Prentice, AT&T has a tower in Spirit Lake, AT&T has a tower in III. So if they're evaluating their providers and evaluating who is providing the best service in their area, the town of Knox is fairly covered. There might be specific areas in holes or underneath particularly dense canopies, but at the end of the day, building more towers improves the level of coverage, and then it's a matter of working with providers to have their coverage extended into those places.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I see that Bug Tussle 2 was formed 21 days ago. The question is why. It's hard to follow this model that you guys are building together here.
So again, Bug Tussle 2 is just a special purpose entity for this bond issuance. So the only reason that it exists is to enter into an indenture with Fond du Lac County so that we can issue this portion of the debt. All of the assets of Bug Tussle 1 are pledged to the participating county, which, Joe, to answer your question from earlier, there is a mortgage for any tower site because that is a real property interest. So when you hand a mortgage for a tower site to the Register of Deeds, they know what to do with it. If you hand them a mortgage for fiber, they don't get it. So that is secured by UCC filing. So you have first position perfected lien on all of the assets Bug Tussle 2 owns in Price County.
So was the original model able to do what you guys are doing?
To what end? Was Bug Tussle 1?
Yeah.
Yes. And as I went through a little bit earlier, is the insurance question is why there is Bug Tussle 2 being created. But again, everything is riding with the corporate guarantee from Hilbert Communications. So again, I wouldn't lose much sleep dissecting the Bug Tussle 1, Bug Tussle 2, Bug Tussle Wireless. There's also a Bug Tussle AA, which is for some individual county loans. There's a Bug Tussle AB, which is our relationship with Brown County. Just all for collateralization purposes to keep the assets in the appropriate bucket so the deals we make with the counties are as clean as possible.
It just gets hairy when there's so many different entities involved in something like this, and then who's actually the guarantor? Are they able to? It's there's a lot of holes get into this contract when you go that route.
To some extent, yes. If you didn't have the corporate guarantee from Hilbert Communications. Hilbert Communications owns everything that we are talking about, whether directly or through its subsidiary. So all of the assets will be owned by Bug Tussle 2. You have a direct lien on all of the assets owned by Bug Tussle 2, guaranteed by Hilbert Communications. So everything works its way back up to the parent company. There's nowhere we can hide anything. We're not allowed to spend any of the money without your approval. It has to be spent and owned by Bug Tussle 2. And the rest of our business that you are co-signing with is the rest of our business.
Can we have our lawyers take a look at this?
He's right here.
I know, I'm talking about our personal lawyers. I mean, this is more or less a sales meeting. There's no cons to any of this.
Andy and Atolis
I'm
have
talking
been
about our personal lawyers. Our Bryce Shaneborn or the other lady.
That's who we've retained to do this. So
I'm asking, are we able to?
it wouldn't do us any. It would cost us.
Well, he works for counties. This is obviously going to benefit him.
No.
Right?
He's our lawyer. We've retained him just like we retained Bryce, just like we have Megan.
On their website, it says that Tolley's Law
Yep.
works for municipalities and counties.
That'd be us, a county.
I know.
I mean, we can pay Bryce to look at it, but he's not an expert at this. That's why we have Ben and Andy. And then when we retained Ben and Andy, it was our choice. So we had the choice between Corliss or whoever we wanted. We chose Atolis. So we made the choice, but because it's a bond project, we would normally get the bill, but instead Bug Tussle gets the bill through the bond process. So I mean, we can have, if that's what the board wants, is another attorney to look at it, but that's why we hired Atolis.
Mitch, one last question.
Yes, sir.
Maybe.
I'm here all day.
Again, this is Bob. That 40 basis points we're getting for the guarantee, right? Is that negotiable?
At this point, I'm going to say no. Just
We're
because,
probably late in the stage.
because we have too many players to open that door today.
Yeah, I understand that. What's going through my head is at the last meeting, you mentioned that you're maybe saving 4% interest by getting a county's guarantee, and 4% on $15 million over 30 years is a lot of money. And for my calculations, it probably averages out to about $500,000 a year.
Yeah.
And we're getting $40,000. And Andy said it's worth its weight in gold. So I'm wondering if that's a good relationship.
It's absolutely worth its weight in gold, and it's worth its weight in the project wouldn't exist without it.
I understand.
So
that's the other side of it.
The
But
further
you know
push
where I'm
this-
coming from.
Absolutely, I agree with you, but I don't think it pencils much higher than that.
And there's a value for us to be co-located on these towers. So that's where we're also using that relationship to negotiate. So
We need tougher negotiators.
Let me address something. I do represent the county. And so my allegiance, my loyalty, my fiduciary obligations to the county. If you want to have an offline discussion, if you want to ask questions that are pointed that we want to have a confidential, privileged conversation, I'm at your disposal. All right. I'm happy to have that conversation. So you just let me know what you want to see, hear, feel, touch, look at, whatever. I'm happy to do it. Okay.
We have a meeting next Tuesday.
I know you do. And I was going to be here virtually. I'm happy to come up in person, whatever works.
Okay.
Whatever works.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Hastings?
My client's like a detailed breakdown of this stuff. Can we get one from Bug Tussle of what the 15 million is?
You have one, but I can provide.
I do. Okay. Where is it at?
Nick has had one at one point. I'll send another.
Nick, where's that at? You said we have one.
we'll get an updated one and we'll get it. I just sent the pro forma, the bond, the 3 audits to Gene. So you should see an email from Gene on those, but we can add any additional information you'd like.
Anything else? Okay, well, we've got this on the agenda for the executive committee on Thursday. Got a lot to digest here in a week's time. I'd like to thank Mitch and Scott, Andy, Ben for attending. And if there's nothing else, the next board meeting will be August 20th, a week from today at 9 o'clock. And we'll adjourn this meeting.